Hi guys! Today we're checking out the Mentor pilot, as you guys suggested in my comments for the Green Dot Aviation reaction. I picked out a little bit of a shorter video to see how I like it, but if you have any recommendations from this channel of videos that you thought were especially good, please put it in the comments so I can check it out. Let's go!
How can two aircraft be on the takeoff roll on the same runway at the same time? Sometimes it takes a truly bizarre incident in order to highlight weaknesses in a safety system, and
I don't even know how that would be possible. I guess there would be enough space for two planes at the same time, but wouldn't the pilots see each other and be like, what the hell? What are you doing on my runway, sir?
this story I'm about to tell you is a perfect example of that. Stay tuned. The story I'm about to tell you took place on the 7th of March 2020 at 9:48 Eastern Standard Time on Toronto Lester B. Pearson International Airport in Canada. Now, in order for you to understand how this incident could happen, we first need to start with explaining a little bit about the layout of the airport itself. The airport consists of 5 different runways connected by taxiways and aprons. On the south side of the airport you have 2 parallel runways, runway 06 left and right and 24 left and right. On the center part you have 2 more parallel runways, runway 15 left and right and 33 left and right. And then on the northern side there is a singular runway, runway 0523. The incident that I'm about to tell you about took place on runway 06 left, but the fact that both runway 06 left and runway 05 was in use at the same time is going to play a role here.
Okay. But they were both on the same runway, right? I guess we will see. He will explain it in detail.
The air traffic control tower is situated at the center of the airport. This means that the controllers in the tower will have a great view of what's happening on every part of the airport, but it also means that some parts of the runways are quite far away from them. So in order for them to be able to see what was going on there, they would need binoculars from time to time. Inside the tower there are 9 air traffic controller workstations, and at the time of the incident 4 of those workstations were occupied. 2 of those controllers were busy handling all the ground movements on the taxiways and aprons. 1 was dealing with giving out air traffic control clearances on the clearance delivery frequency, and 1 of the controllers were in charge of all of the takeoff and landings. That controller was sitting at the workstation of the north controller position, which
Somehow this job also sounds really interesting. In general, I feel like jobs at the airport sound very interesting.
meant that he had an unobstructed forward view of runway 0523 and also of the center runways, runway 15 left and right and 33 left and right. And those were the runways that the north tower controller would be normally handling. But at the time of the incident, the amount of movements at the airport, as in takeoffs and landings, were considered moderate to sometimes light. And that meant that this controller was working in something called a combined position. This meant that he was covering the workload for both the north and the south controller. And since runway 06 left was in use as well as runway 05, in order for this controller to be able to see what was going on runway 06 left and give clearances there, he needed to stand up on his workstation, turn around 180 degrees and look over the heads of his colleagues.
But I'm correct in the assumption that if 06 and 05 take off at the same time, they would not conflict with each other, because it looks like there's a huge distance between the 2 strips. Even though they go in the same direction, I don't think the airplanes would be remotely close to each other, right?
Now, this was not normally a problem. He had a good view from there, and this is something that they would normally do. Air traffic controllers have access to a lot of different tools and warning systems in order to increase their situational awareness, tell them what is going on in their area of responsibility, and also to warn them in case something is about to go wrong. One of those systems is called RIMCAS, which stands for Runway Incursion Monitoring and Conflict Alert System. RIMCAS is part of the new Advanced Surface Movement Guidance Control System, or ASMGCS. This system fuses together information from a lot of different sources, including ground radar, but also the ADS-B transponder systems inside of the aircraft themselves. And this is supposed to be far superior to the older warning systems that were much more reliant on only ground radar, and because of that gave a lot of false warnings and wasn't very reliable. Now, the way that RIMCAS works is that it divides its warnings into 2 different stages, stage 1 and stage 2 warnings. Like I mentioned before, it utilizes ground radar and the ADS-B status of the aircraft to determine where the aircraft are and if they are in conflict with each other, as in if they're sharing a runway, for example. But then it also takes into consideration whether or not these aircraft are airborne or how quickly they are approaching each other in order to determine which type, if any, warning it's going to issue. A Stage 1 alert is issued when RIMCAS feels that 2 or more targets are on the same runway at the same time. This is just a graphical alert on the screen, it doesn't have any audio elements to it, and it is inhibited when RIMCAS feels that one of the targets, the one in front, is accelerating away from the other target with more than 50 knots. A Stage 2 alert is both a visual on-screen alert and an oral.
My ears! I'm glad it's a loud alert so that if something happens, they can hear it. That's good. I will say, how common is it that 2 planes are on the same runway? Because I feel like I've never been in the pilot seat. I don't actually know how close you are to the other planes, but it sometimes feels like you're basically waiting for the other planes to take off and then you like follow them onto the runway so it's your turn to take off. But I don't think they're like on the same runway at the same exact time. I think if anything, the second plane would be waiting to enter the runway or something like that, right? Anyway, let's go back to that audio warning.
To highlight to the controller that something serious might be about to happen. Now, the Stage 2 alert is issued when a target is felt to be in front of an aircraft that is accelerating for departure with a higher speed than 20 knots. This alert is inhibited if the target in front is felt to be accelerating away from the target behind, because that will be interpreted as a departing aircraft and thus not a threat. Both of these warnings are inhibited if any of the targets are sensed to be in the air, as in airborne, because this is an on-ground collision warning system. And that brings us to the next interesting part of this puzzle, which is how the aircraft in themselves sense that they're airborne and when they send that information out through ADS-B. Almost all modern transport category aircraft have something called weight-on-wheel switches, and those are connected to their air data inertial reference units, and when the aircraft gets airborne, those weight-on-wheel switches will feel that the aircraft is no longer on the ground, and they will send the signals up through the air data inertial reference units into the transponder and out via ADS-B saying, I am now airborne. These systems are generally very good and reliable, but there have been some instances where they haven't worked. And because the whole idea with the aircraft sending out its status as being on the ground or in the air was to start activating the TCAS system to highlight potential conflicts and collisions in the air.
So TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System, an aircraft collision avoidance system designed to reduce the incidence of mid-air collision between aircraft. Makes sense.
The system needed to have some kind of safeguard. Because of that and the need for redundancy, it was also decided that these aircraft would include a system that would feel if the aircraft reached a speed of minimum 100 knots, and if it did so, it would send out an in-the-air signal no matter what the weight-on-wheel switches were saying.
But theoretically the plane could go 100 knots and still be on the ground. It's just unlikely, I suppose, because at that point, I think you'd probably be taking off. I actually don't know what the takeoff speed is.
And that's going to become important here. Now, on the day of the incident, the weather was really nice. It was only some very high clouds.
I thought he was going to say the weather was really bad, and it would have made sense then to have errors. No, the weather was perfect, actually. Not an issue at all.
Light winds, very good visibility, and a temperature of -5 degrees Celsius.
-5! So not even that low, I'm just sensitive, honestly.
The controller had started his shift at 06:15 in the morning, and he had rotated through several different controller positions until at time 09:30 he took on the role as the tower controller. Because the weather was nice, he used something called pilot-applied visual separation rules between departing aircraft. What this means is that it's up to the pilots in the aircraft behind to maintain visual separation between him and the preceding aircraft after departure. And by doing this, the controller could save a lot of time, because using the normal separation rules applied when the weather is less good would extend the distance between each departing aircraft quite a lot. Now, this type of very tight separation can only be used if there's no risk of wake turbulence to the aircraft behind. This tends to happen if a large aircraft, a heavy aircraft depart. It creates these very, very strong wake vortices behind the wing, and those can actually be dangerous. So if a large aircraft is departing, you're going to have to extend the separation anyway. But if it's a relatively small aircraft departing, that is not going to be a problem, and you can keep the departures really, really tight.
I think they would know pretty well how far away they should be from the other aircraft. Like, I trust them enough to be able to figure that out. And clearly the controller did too, right?
Now you might ask yourself, why is it so important to keep the departures that tight? Those aircraft so close to each other?
Probably timing, scheduling, to like not block the air traffic. I don't know other than that what could be the reason.
But what you have to remember is that if a controller can manage to shave off a few seconds of each departure, it means that they can actually get away quite a few more aircraft during any given hour. And this means fewer delays for the passengers, shorter on-ground time for the airlines, which ultimately saves a lot of money. So this is something that any professional air traffic controller is trying to achieve. Now, when pilot-applied visual separation rules are enforced, the air traffic controller is not supposed to give the takeoff clearance to the following aircraft until the preceding aircraft is airborne. The controllers will perceive the aircraft to be airborne when they initiate the rotation, because they know that the pilots have then passed their V1 decision speed and that they are committed to the takeoff. Most experienced controllers will have learned where different aircraft types typically start to rotate on the runway, and when they see that those aircraft are passing that part of the runway, they might start to initiate the takeoff clearance for the following aircraft, because they know that giving the takeoff clearance and having that aircraft reading that takeoff clearance back will take a few seconds, at which point that previous aircraft is going to be well airborne. Now, before we get into the actual serious incident here, I just want to share this short message from my sponsor, who makes it possible for me to create this kind of content for you guys. Do you want to feel smarter by watching great documentaries from...
I actually do! I love documentaries! Damn, finally an ad that fits my interests. Usually it's something like, ooh, do you want to get better at math and science? I'm like, no interest in math whatsoever.
some of the best filmmakers in existence. Well, then head over to curiositystream.com, the Netflix for documentary fans.
Does anyone know CuriosityStream? Like, is it actually good? Because I do enjoy documentaries. I just never had the incentive to like spend money on it like a subscription.
It is one of my favorite subscription streaming services with thousands of high-quality, non-fictional titles available. Enjoy new shows every week about things like nature, science, history, sports, and much more. I recently watched a great documentary series called Zenith, Advances in Space Exploration, about the advances in rocket technology and satellites, and you should check that out. CuriosityStream is available on pretty much any streaming device that you can imagine all around the world, and it's extremely affordable with less than $20 per year. But since you are a subscriber of this channel, you can use the link in the description here below, which is curiositystream.com/mentourpilot, and the coupon code mentourpilot. That will give you a whopping 25% further reduction on the price, bringing it down to $14.99 per year. That's only $1.25 per month, which
Here you go, you can pause this to check it out if you want to.
Which is incredible value for money. Thank you CuriosityStream for sponsoring the channel. Now back to the video. At time 09:48, this is 18 minutes after the ATC controller has taken up the role as tower controller in the tower, an Air Canada Embraer 190 with 83 passengers on board, 2 cabin crew and 2 pilots are getting ready for takeoff at runway 06 left.
Would this be considered a really small plane? Because it feels like 83 passengers and only 2 crew is very tiny, right?
The tower controller tells them to enter the runway and he gives them the takeoff clearance. The pilots on board the Embraer start to advance their thrust levels for takeoff and the aircraft starts accelerating down the runway. As the Embraer passes 50 knots, the ADS-B system inside of the aircraft sends a signal to the RIMCast system inside of the control tower saying that it's now airborne. Like we were discussing before, this is happening well before the aircraft is actually airborne. It will be accelerating for many more seconds, but it now shows up as airborne on the RIMCast display. Sending out the airborne signal at 50 knots is much earlier than most other aircraft would do. Most other aircraft would do it at 100 knots, but it's still okay according to the current rules. Now, as this is happening and the Embraer continues to accelerate down the runway, the air traffic controller clears another Air Canada aircraft, a Boeing 777 with 345 passengers on board, 2 pilots and 12 cabin crew, to enter the runway, line up and wait for departure.
That's definitely a bigger flight.
The Boeing 777 is significantly bigger than the departing Embraer 190 ahead of them, so wake turbulence is not going to be a problem. And the pilots line up on the runway and gets ready for an immediate takeoff whenever they get the clearance. On board the Embraer 190, everything is now looking normal, and when the controller sees that the Embraer is passing the point on the runway where he is pretty confident that it's just about to rotate, the controller starts issuing the takeoff clearance for the Boeing 777 behind them. This was read back by the pilots in the 777, and they started advancing their thrust levels for takeoff, initiating their own takeoff roll. Now, they could still see the Embraer in front of them, but they were also pretty confident that he was just about to get airborne.
Yeah, so far, it seems like everything went down according to regulations, right? Obviously, errors can always happen, like we're probably about to see. But so far, there's not really a person that you can blame for something like this, right? If everything was done according to regulation and 99.9%, that's how it happens.
Here there might be some differences between the rules in North America and the rules that applies to us here in Europe, because I would not be allowed to start my takeoff roll unless the preceding aircraft has gotten airborne.
So in Europe, it's not just predicted takeoff, it is actual takeoff that is confirmed then.
There's also more rules in Europe when it comes to the vertical separation needed during standard instrument departures, so it is unlikely that this type of clearance would have been issued in this way in Europe. But
we do love our rules and regulations in Europe, that is fair.
In Canada at the time, this was perfectly normal. When the Boeing 777 pilots had read back their takeoff clearance, the air traffic controller perceived that there was nothing more for him to monitor at that time on this runway, so he turned back onto his northerly facing tower position in order to monitor some landing traffic on runway.
Oh, okay, that's not good. I mean, I understand why he would do that, because everything seems fine in his mind, but yeah, it's probably not a good decision.
05. But now comes the problem. Because as the air traffic controller was giving the takeoff clearance to the Boeing 777 behind them, the pilots in the Embraer noticed that a big bird passed just below the side window on the captain's side. They could both hear how it impacted the body, and the captain thought that there was a major risk that this bird would be sucked into the left-hand engine.
Oh man! First of all, rest in peace to the bird. That sucks a lot. Second of all, I cannot believe a bird is causing all this.
And because he thought so, he immediately initiated a rejected takeoff. This happened at 139 knots, which is just a couple of knots short of the V1 speed of 146 knots. So the fact that the controller had judged the Embraer's position on the runway as being close to takeoff is completely understandable. However, now the Embraer is not taking off anymore. It's about to stop on the runway ahead of the huge Boeing 777 behind them. The Embraer pilots now followed standard rejected takeoff procedures, and part of those procedures was that the first officer needed to call air traffic control and tell them that they were rejecting the takeoff. Unfortunately, as he was doing this, at the exact same time, the first officer in the Boeing 777 behind them also read back their takeoff clearance.
No.
And because the output strength of the radio inside of the Boeing 777 was a bit stronger than the Embraer's radio, this completely masked the message from the Embraer, meaning that not only did the air traffic controller not hear that the Embraer was rejecting the takeoff, neither did the pilots inside of the Boeing 777 behind them.
Oh, dude, that sucks. Is there a way to fix that and to make it possible that both are audible in some way? Because that sucks, man. I know it's exceedingly rare, But still, it should be possible somehow, right?
The pilots of the Boeing 777 is now in the middle of their own takeoff roll, and they can still see the Embraer ahead of them. But they're still assuming that it's about to take off, because judging the distance and the speed of an object ahead of you when you are moving yourself is very, very hard. The controller, on the other hand, is looking the other way towards runway 05, where he has landing traffic coming in. And the RIMCAS system on his screen ahead of him is not giving out any type of warning, because the Embraer, even though it's decelerating now, is still above 50 knots, which means that it's still indicating airborne.
Oh man, I see the issue. Oh.
The tower controller now turns back towards runway 06 left again, and he clears another aircraft, a de Havilland Dash 8, to enter the runway to get ready for takeoff, which means that there are now 3 aircraft on this runway at the same time.
Oh my
but RIMCAS is still not giving off any warning, because now the Embraer is indicated as airborne, and the Boeing 777 has accelerated to above 100 knots, which means that it is also indicated as airborne on the screen.
Oh my god.
The Boeing 777 continues to accelerate down the runway, and the pilots are now starting to get really worried about what they're seeing in front of them, because in front of them, the Embraer has reduced their speed to well below 50 knots now and starting to come almost to a full stop. But the RIMCAS is still not activating, because now the Boeing 777 is shown as airborne.
Oh my god.
And the Dash 8 has still not entered onto the runway behind them. As the Boeing 777 reaches 127 knots, the captain decides to reject the takeoff. At this point, it's about 5,000 feet in between the Embraer and the 777, which is about 1,650 meters, and it's shrinking very fast, obviously. Now, some of you might ask yourself, wouldn't it be more logical or even safer for the Boeing 777 to just continue to accelerate and take off above the Embraer in a situation like this? And while that would have been the case if they would have paused V1 before they would have noticed that this was happening, the fact is that at this stage in the takeoff roll, it's no time for complex decision making.
I feel like in that moment you have to do a very, very quick decision, and it might be that the pilot considered the risk too great to like clip the other plane while taking off or something like that. I could imagine that, where if you're already airborne and you clip something, it might lead to a greater accident than if you like slightly crash into each other or something like that, you know?
The pilot perceived that the runway was blocked ahead of him, and the way that we've been trained is that above 80 knots we're supposed to reject the takeoff basically only for engine failure, engine fire, severe damage, or the aircraft is unsafe or unable to fly. And in this case, a blocked runway could be considered to be either unsafe or unable to fly. In any case, it's very, very hard to judge the distance ahead to the obstacle when you're on speeds like this. So I completely understand the captain's decision to reject this takeoff, and the investigators that wrote the final report about this incident did not question the captain's decision to reject either. In any case, the Boeing 777 was now rejecting the takeoff, and the first officer communicated this fact to the tower controller. The tower controller acknowledged this and started getting ready to give any type of assistance that the Boeing 777 crew might need after the rejected takeoff. And he also started to look up in the sky where he was expecting to see the Embraer 190 departing. But it was at this point that he realized, to his horror, as he was looking down on the runway further ahead, that the Embraer 190 had also rejected the takeoff and was now still on the runway. At this point, the first RIMCAS warnings activated in the control tower. First, between the Dash 8 that was just about to line up on runway 06 left and the Embraer at the very end. Then between the 777 that was now decelerating at the middle of the runway and the Embraer. And finally, between the Dash 8 and the 777. In the end, both aircraft managed to stop safely on the runway.
Thankfully.
And the Embraer 190 received a taxi clearance to exit the runway at the very end and then proceed towards the terminal building. The Boeing 777 also exited the runway from about the midpoint, but then they had to hold on the taxiway for about 45 minutes to allow the brake discs to cool down until they were safe to continue. And after that, they also continued back to the terminal building.
Thankfully.
The investigation eventually concluded that this incident had been caused by highly optimized ATC workflow in combination with pilot-applied visual separation. This, together with the bird strike that caused the Embraer to reject its takeoff and the simultaneous transmission from both first officers about the RTO and the takeoff clearance, which eventually masked the message from the Embraer and caused all of the involved parties to lose their situational awareness. And this, by the way, is something that you might recognize from one of my other videos that I did, which had a much worse outcome. You can check it out up here. These factors, together with the fact that RIMCAS hadn't issued any warning to the air traffic controller during the critical phase of this incident, because of the way that the ADS-B transponders on board of the aircraft had been programmed, led to the issuing of an ATCI, an Air Traffic Control Information Bulletin. In this bulletin, it was highlighted that certain aircraft types, including the Embraer, might have an earlier onset of in-flight indication, and that because of this, some warnings might not come when expected. There was also some experiments made by increasing the speed where the aircraft would indicate when it was airborne, but it showed that if that was done, it could lead to a much higher rate of false warnings that could eventually lead to the air traffic controllers stopping to listen to RIMCAS at all.
I guess in general, it wasn't really anyone's fault per se. It is just that maybe the air traffic controller could have paid better attention to the whole situation if he wasn't doing two jobs at once, pretty much. But it seems like all the systems worked as intended, and this was just a very unfortunate outlier case that would normally never ever happen. Either way, I'm really glad that nothing bad happened and that they managed to solve the situation like peacefully and without any incidents. That's really, really good. And I guess this case helped bring awareness to the fact that the systems aren't perfect and that human oversight is always needed in such cases, you know?
And though it was the human factor that saved the day when the pilots in the Boeing 777 realized the threat and rejected the takeoff,
Good
thus
job.
saving the situation from becoming even more critical. Now, if you want to check out the video where a very similar situation led to a much worse outcome, then check out this video up here.
It was a really interesting video, actually, and I really like the way that he explained it because I was able to grasp a lot of the technical stuff that I would normally not necessarily understand or have any prior knowledge about, so that was really cool. I also think, in watching these aviation videos, I just noticed how fascinated I am by all the effort and like small details that go into flying that you as a passenger would never even consider, but there's so many systems in place to make sure that everything is safe and that everything at an airport can function. And I think that stuff is so interesting. So I'd be definitely down to watch more of these videos. If you guys have any really good ones by Mentor Pilot that you really enjoyed, please let me know in the comments. And I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you for the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.